This computer. Hello, and welcome to another Careers in Technology Summer Series session for 2024. Tonight's speaker is Paul Carney. And so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and hand things over to our speaker for the night, Paul Carney.
All right. Can everyone hear me? You hear me, Michael?
Yep, we're good.
Good to go? All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Carney, and let me go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we'll just jump right in. Get my slideshow going so you can see the first screen there. There we go. We're up and running. All right. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in. And I know there'll be some folks that'll come in here past few minutes. But my name is Paul Carney. I am the Chief Human Resource Officer for Carter Bank and Trust at the moment, which is a 700-person, $4.6 billion community bank based out of Virginia, North Carolina. But that's my day job. By night, I am a techie. I am a techie by trade. So I started my career as a high school math teacher. And then wrote my first computer program, sold it to somebody, and said, I got to get in this computer thing. And this was the mid to late 80s. And jumped into technology and saw my first NCSA Mosaic web browser. Probably remember it became called Netscape Navigator. Saw it in 1992 and said, what is that thing? Now, I've been using the internet. And people confuse the internet with the web. They're not the same. The internet is a protocol. The internet's a system out there, and you got all the protocols on it. We were using Gopher. We were using Telnet, email. Most people forget that email is actually a protocol on the internet. And then this World Wide Web thing came along. So I said, I got to figure this out. It's going to change the way we do business. And so I built my first business in 1996, sold it in 97, built another one with some friends, sold that to techies.com in 99, and then built the next one and sold that actually in 2019. I wasn't in I still owned part of the company, but wasn't actively engaged in it anymore. So like I said, I tell people I'm a techie by trade, because everyone even asks me, says, what's an HR, especially a chief human resource officer, talking about technology, especially when it comes to AI? Well, I had one of those watershed moments that happened again in December of 2022, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. When I saw ChatGPT, it was dropped on the world, saw this thing and said, oh my gee, this is going to change everything again. Actually, even more than the desktop computer, which I saw come along, the web, World Wide Web, and then the smartphone. This is actually going to do things even differently. So today's discussion is going to be a little bit about this. I'm going to talk to you about what I've learned, how things are going, where I see this is not going to be like any other AI discussion you've seen. I can guarantee that. Hopefully you'll understand by the end some of the stuff I've learned in the past about 8 to 9 months of doing speeches like this, including to 1,200 people who showed up to my speech in the National SHRM Conference, Society of Human Resource Management, back in June. They had you schedule for a little room that held 250 people, and 3 weeks before the conference, they moved me to the ballroom because everybody was signing up for my session. So it's a pretty popular idea. I'm sure all of you know AI is all out there. You probably got your own opinions, thoughts, ideas, but hopefully I can show you some things today that are going to change your mind about certain things you think about with AI, and or if you're not quite sure what to do yet, get you started where to go. So I'm going to jump right in, and we're going to start with, let's get going here. There, if I click on my screen, it will go. So the goals for today, I'm going to talk a little bit what is AI. We're going to talk about generative AI. That's this concept here, how to use it in your job and wrap up in resources. Very quick, easy to do. So what is AI? You've probably all seen this description. Again, you're all pretty technical people. You probably know this. But I generally want to make sure people understand that it's that last line, enabling computers to think and learn in similar ways to us. Now, one of the things, and again, the audience, I'm typically talking to business people or HR folks, not necessarily technical people like you all. You may understand some of this, but I'm going to go over it. So, there's different types of AI. You got the machine learning. If you remember back in the day when IBM created Deep Blue, remember Deep Blue? It was back in the 90s. They created that to try to beat the best world's chess champion. Remember that? Deep Blue. And they taught it and taught it and taught it, and they finally beat them. IBM Watson came along in the mid-2010s to about 2014 or so, and their goal was to beat the top Jeopardy players. Again, machine learning. Teach it, teach it, teach it, and you'll eventually get there. Computer vision and robotics, I usually ask people, how many of you have seen or owned a Roomba, right? That's actually computer vision and robotics combined. That's all it is. It's just a machine that knows where it is and kind of knows to move around and do something. So we've been using AI, and that's why my little tag thing is you've been using AI for decades. You've been using it, you just didn't know it. Expert systems I won't talk about too much here, but the natural language processing is the thing that's really changed. That neural network, the natural language processing, that's the stuff that has changed dramatically over the past few years and where things are really going. So let's talk a little bit more about that. All right. So let me start with an example. And this is one of the areas I talk to you, anyone about this. And I'm going to say to you, don't just figure out how to use AI to do your current job. Yes, you can do that. There's ways to do it. It's going to be great. You'll enhance yourself. You'll have superpower and capabilities of almost the level of the Avengers level. But do this. Beyond that, think about how you can use it to do other things. And let me just give you this quick example. So back in the day, before GPS was really available, if you wanted to get a taxi, I was visiting my sister-in-law in Long Island, New York, needed to get a taxi to LaGuardia. All the taxi companies pick up, they answer the phone, where do you want? The hell, where are you going? I didn't know what he was saying. Where are you going? He's asking. I said, LaGuardia. Where are you? I said, I'm at this address in LaGuardia. All right, be there in 10. Or I'm in Long Island. So then they had to radio around to figure out who was near me to get me and take me up because they didn't know. GPS came along and suddenly they had routing capabilities. They could now see where their taxis were, change the way they operate, right? Because they could dispatch people, they knew where things were happening, but they didn't change their model. You still had to either call the taxi company or you had to go stand on the side of a street, a main street, like in New York City. You couldn't stand on a side street. You had to be on the main street and wave and call the taxi. They had the opportunity to create Uber and Lyft. They just didn't because they didn't change their model. They didn't take the technology and come up with something a little bit different. When the World Wide Web came along with GPS, they could have created that and they didn't. So when I say the same thing's true with AI, you're going to use AI to enhance your job, do the things you do different, better, faster, more efficiently, come up with some more creative ideas. But think about how to use these tools to do something different. That's my story there. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk very quickly through predictive machine learning versus generative AI so I can show you this. So again, the predictive machine learning is where you take data, you add labels, and you come out with another label. Sort of the machine, the Deep Blue, the Watson, teach it something. Generative AI is a little different because it takes unstructured data, puts it through the engine, and comes up with something new. So let me give you a quick example to really highlight how this works. All right, so if I want to teach a machine what a cat looks like, I'm going to show it a picture of a cat and say, there's a cat. I'll show it another picture of a cat, there's another cat. Or another picture of a cat, there's a cat. There's a cat in a hat. Everyone knows what that is. There's Grumpy Cat. Then if I show it this picture and say, is it a cat? It's going to get confused. And then typically, I can't hear all of you right now, but typically when I do this in front of live audiences, they all kind of laugh and giggle. And I say, yeah, a 5-year-old would giggle and say, that's a cat with a silly hat on. But a computer may not be able to figure that out. If it knows what sharks look like and knows what cats look like, it's going to look at this going, I don't know what this is. That 5-year-old figured it out really fast. A little 5-year-old brain. You know, our brains take about 20 watts of power to run. Yeah, we all hear it takes, a 16-ounce glass of water to cool down one prompt that you make with an AI engine. The amount of energy it takes to create these AI engines is enormous. And yet 20 watts of power and your little 5-year-old kid can figure out that's a silly hat on a cat. There's the issue. So don't worry about Gen AI taking over everything, because until we can figure out how our brains work, we're not going to be able, the machines aren't going to figure it out either. But there's an example of labeling doesn't always work. Now, here's an example with what generative AI does. You take all this content, PDFs, Word documents, Excel, and let's toss in the entire content on the web, put it through the engine, and it creates something new. That's what's radically different. That's what excites people and freaks them out at the same time, is how did it do that? And we're not going to talk deeply about that, but what I really want to talk about is what happened December 2022, is actually late November 2022, is this little company, research company based in 2015 when they started, came out with this product called ChatGPT. They just dumped it on the earth. They did not come out with any fanfare. They didn't come out with any pre-announcements, kind of like Dean Kamen did back when he announced Ginger, which became the Segway, which he thought was going to change the world, and it never really did. These guys didn't do that. They just dropped it on everyone. And when I first started playing with this thing, I said, oh, this is pretty cool. And then I did a little bit more. I'm like, oh, that's neat. And I asked it some more deep questions, or I challenged it and said, oh, this is wild. And Then I went further. It's like, wow, what is this thing doing? It is here to stay. And I think we've all figured that out. It's not going anywhere. So the key thing is for you to figure out how to incorporate it, what to do. And I'm going to give you some of those techniques and prompts today. So I'm going to start off with this. So I'm going to tell you this because I've written a couple of books myself. I've painted portraits you don't want to look at them. Actually, it's funny because I'm in a remote location right now. Typically, if I'm in my home office, you'd see a painting from one of those paint with a twist things where they teach you how to paint. And I say I can paint, and I've written a song. So if I can do all of that, so can you. But so what holds you back? I mean, there you go. You got a blank book, a portrait, and a sheet of music. What holds you back? It's usually three things. Time. Okay, you can learn how to allocate time differently in your life. Skills. Okay, you can learn skills. You'll go read some or watch some Bob Ross paintings and paint some happy trees on your portrait. But the third thing is inspiration. And that's typically what holds all of us back. And it's no different when these generative AI tools, and I'm showing ChatGPT, see, it still says 4, it's not even the 4.0 yet. There's that little cursor just blinking at you. The entire knowledge set of ChatGPT is sitting in that little blinking box. Where do you start? What do you do? And that's usually what holds people back. So that's what I'm here to help you with some ideas and thoughts and hopefully get you there. So 2023 was the year of excitement. 2024 is the year of deployment. And that's, I don't have to tell you that. I think as I get deeper into the year, at the beginning of the year, this was a little more, but now that we're deeper into the year, this is not a thing. But what I'm going to say to you is it's all about prompting. The prompt is what really matters. You need to learn how to use it effectively. Prompting is the key, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. Yes, there's a responsible use of it. It has its issues. We're going to talk about those too. I can't ignore those. But what I really want to focus on is how you prompt. All right. I have a bunch of little aha moments I've learned over the past few years. I've started using ChatGPT. Well, it'll be 2 years ago in December. So one of the things I've learned is it's the smartest 7-year-old you'll ever encounter. And when you start to act like that, you'll see. And there's 3 reasons why it's the smartest 7-year-old. First, it has unshakable confidence. It thinks it knows everything. But we all know it has no worldly context, and it really doesn't understand. It's got some knowledge, but information, but it really does not have context or worldly knowledge of what it is. So that's typical of what a 7-year-old would have. Second, you have to be very direct and specific. And let me give you an example. If you walk in and your 7-year-old son is jumping up and down on the couch, and you say, "Don't jump up and down on the couch," and he gets off and he goes over to the chair and starts jumping up and down on the chair. And you say, "Didn't I tell you not to jump up and down on the furniture?" He's going to say to you, "No, you said the couch." AI is the same way. If you're not very literal and specific with it, you'll get very different results. And I on LinkedIn, I posted something about 3 or 4 weeks ago where I showed the same prompt. It was a very simple prompt, and I changed one word. I changed cheap to cost effective. Ran the prompts twice and got totally different results because the word cheap was focused on the cost alone. Cost effective was focused on the price for the value. So when you look at these two things, it changes dramatically. You have to be very literal with the engine. And the third reason it's like the smartest 7-year-old is if it doesn't know something, it's going to make it up. And so here's the case. Your 7-year-old daughter sitting at the table, her dinner plate's still pretty full. You look away for about 5 seconds and you look back and it's empty. And you ask her, "Where'd the food go?" And she's going to tell you some story of some alien swooped in a big old arm and sucked it away and everything. Meanwhile, the dog is under the table enjoying dinner. So it'll make up stuff. Now, you've heard the story, I'm sure, back in the day saying, "Oh, this lawyer, it lies. The lawyer asked for a case to support his argument and it gave a fake case and he went into court and it was all embarrassing." I argue and say, no, the lawyer didn't know how to ask the right question. He didn't know how to develop the right prompt because he said, his prompt was, "Give me a court case that will support this argument." And so it's a generative AI. It said, "Here's a great court case that would support that." And it was, but it was made up. He failed to say, "Give me a court case that exists." Don't generate something out of the blue. And they call it temperature in ChatGPT. So you can tell it how creative it can be and how not. He failed to do that because he didn't understand. So it didn't lie. It created, and you can control that. So there you go. There's probably the most interesting thing I've learned. There's a couple other aha moments I'll share with you, but this is probably the biggest one. And when you start thinking about every time you interact with an AI engine now, think of it as the smartest 7-year-old because it'll change the way you think. It'll change your mindset to be, that's right, it doesn't know everything, but I'm going to use it to my best knowledge the way I can. All right. Talk nerdy to me, natural language, new binary. When I put the slide together, my wife kind of thought, talk nerdy to me, is that a little edgy, especially for HR people? I was like, no, and actually HR people love it. But what I want you to do is remember this slide for a second, because I'm going to come back in a few slides and we're going to talk about this a bit. All right, we've all had this situation happen. LOL, mom, why are you calling me little old lady, honey? Text messages, emails, where context is lost, tone is lost. We communicate with each other through some medium on a computer and it's not working well, right? We've all had it. It happens. So, in fact, I had a friend one time who mentioned something about me, the chocolate soft serve emoji, and I looked at him and said, dude, that's not chocolate soft serve. He's like, what do you mean? And I explained to him what it was, and he says, why is it smiling? I don't know. That's one of those things I can't explain to you. But you never know what's going to happen, because without context, things happen. These are just some examples of things when you get tone and style. We can range in all these different places. And Jamie Tevin, from Microsoft, she's the chief scientist at Microsoft, had this great comment, and it really got me thinking. She goes, we can now interact with computers the same way we've interacted with humans for millennia using our natural language. Well, I argued and said, first thing I thought was, yeah, we've been doing that, but are we really good at communicating with each other? I don't think so. Look at our political situation. Look at some of the things that go on in this world. We fight wars because of miscommunications. So we're not really good at communicating with each other. I just showed you some examples in emails and text messages where we don't really good at communicating with each other with a computer between us. And now we're going to use our natural language to talk directly to computers. Oh boy, this is going to be a tough one. So that's where I started looking at this going, all right, I got to really dig in deep here and understand this a bit more, because we're in trouble if we don't understand how to do this and do this well. All right, so I bring it back to when I was creating the speech late last year. I actually had, and this is one of my simple prompts, I actually asked at this time ChatGPT to say, I have a speech I'm giving, transitioning for a section, talks about the history, I want to talk about what's next about normal interactions. Please provide 3 examples of a section divider that will help transition, provide a short title, 5 to 15 word example, make the tone fun and witty. And of course, you can see it came back, certainly, talk nerdy to me, natural language, new binary. And I'm like, I love it. And you can see where I said, I love that last one, perfect. And then it comes back and says, I'm thrilled to hear, okay, yeah, talk nerdy, we should make it. And then it said, may it spark engaging and insightful conversations. I looked at that for a few seconds and said, I never told it that's what I was after. There's nothing in my prompt that said that's what I was going after. It made an assumption that's what I was trying to do. And that's when I realized, wow, if I'm not clear and specific and really guide it, it's going to start making assumptions of what I'm trying to do. Now you might say, okay, yeah, that one worked, that assumption worked. But boy, in a lot of other cases, if I'm making, so that actually surprises a lot of people when you see that it actually made those assumptions and used that knowledge to give me the answers. So be aware of that. That's another big aha moment, that you've really got to make sure you're specific and clear, because you don't want it assuming things that you didn't want, because it'll take you down paths you didn't necessarily want to go down. So I thought I'd share that with you so you can see my actual ChatGPT. All right, and it's flawed. I will tell you, if anyone tells you, oh, I don't use it because it lies, it does it, every humans lie. We all have flaws. The key to it, though, is, all of you are listening to this presentation here. When I do the speech in front of folks, I did it to National Society of Human Resource Management, like I told you, 1,200 people. Every one of them heard the same speech at the same time, but they're going to walk out with different knowledge and experience because they walked in with a different knowledge and experience, and how I talk is going to impact them differently. But it goes, and that's what kind of scares people, and that's okay. But my biggest thing is, these are not reasons to avoid it, but more reasons to understand it. So don't just stick your head in the sand and say, it's got all these issues. No, focus on it. Figure out what it does. Get trusted people around you. You'll see that a bit later. The way to get around this is trust people, figure out what they're saying, and follow them. That's the way to do it. Now, I make a pretty bold prompt here, a pretty bold statement in red. I probably put it big and bold in red. It said, you'll succeed or fail based on the prompts that you create. It really is about that. And I hold true to that still today. I actually said this 6 months ago, and I'm still holding true. I think it's even more so today. You've got to learn how to develop those high quality prompts. And I don't care if you're using something that's built into the Adobe PDF system now, the assistant or whatever it is, they still are asking you, what do you want? And if you're not really good at telling them what you want, it's going to go off and make assumptions, go off and pass, do a lot of things you may not want it to do. No. And then the whole thing about having a conversation, if anyone ever tells you it's just like talking to a person, absolutely not. And I will tell you, here's one example. When you are making a request of someone to ask them for a favor, you're generally going to walk up and give them a little context, a little history. You're setting the stage for asking them the favor. With generative AI, don't do that. You need to put the request right up front, because if you start with that whole history and give them context, it's starting to process thinking, what are they asking? What are they asking? What are they asking? And by the time you get your request, it's already off thinking what it wants. Put the request up front and then give it the context. Total opposite way you would talk to humans in those situations. So when someone says to you, it's just like talking to a human, it's not. And you've got to understand that. It uses our language, but it's very different from how you talk to a person. All right. So one of the things, my wife, great person, lover, great support, great rock of mine. What I always get excited when I was doing these things in ChatGPT, I was using Perplexity, Gemini. Well, it was back before it was Gemini and Copilot. And then I would call it my friend, my agent, this and that. She says, that's stupid. Give it a name. So I said, okay, she's actually the one that came up with it. She's the one that came up with this name, Xavier, which is actually an acronym for Expert AI Value in Every Response. So now when I refer to using any of the AI engines, and I typically use ChatGPT and Perplexity the most, but I use all of them. I paid subscription to all of them because I got to understand how they all work. But I refer to them all as Xavier. They're all Xavier. Xavier, when you hear me say I use Xavier, Xavier is that. So what I did is I took all this content I was researching and said, all right, given all this information I've learned about you over these couple of years and stuff, and it saw this slide and said, what would you look like? And it came back with this picture. This is the picture it gave me of what it would look like. Of course, remember I said the 7-year-old, he's probably a little 8-ish, maybe 9, but maybe not quite 7. But it's this kid on a computer with all these weird wires connected to this library of knowledge. This is the picture it gave me. So again, the creativity of these engines is amazing. Don't forget that. Challenge it sometimes. In fact, I'll tell you, it's probably one of the big things people don't do is don't challenge it enough. All right, I've had an emotional journey with AI, and I want to share with you the 3 things I've learned. These, again, are some aha moments. I was frustrated one time, and this is the early days of GPT when DALL-E was in there. I couldn't get it to generate an image for me. I was like, give me this image, give me this image. It would not give me the image. I was frustrated. Got up out of my chair. I was like, fine, I'll just go over to Midjourney. I was really asking it to give me a Midjourney prompt so I could go to Midjourney because I know DALL-E wasn't that good, and it just couldn't do it. It's like, I'll just go to Midjourney and just figure it out myself. And I felt badly because I felt I was haranguing this thing. I was haranguing ChatGPT. I was like, and then I realized, wait a minute, it's a computer. It doesn't care. So I came back to it and asked it a question. It's another huge aha moment. I think you see it in 3 or 4 slides from now. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I asked it a question that got me past this frustration and realizing I'm in control here. So don't get frustrated with it. Don't just give up. Find a way. And that, like I said, that one prompt I'll give you in a few seconds is actually a very powerful one. All right. So I use it to develop code, building a website with my daughter and a few friends called Perpeta that's going to allow you to store prompts, break it down to snippets, profiles. We'll talk about those in a minute. Structure your prompts, make it better, reuse items. I've got Google Docs with thousands of items all over the place, and I'm finally putting it into a system where I can use it. And I thought, oh, other people can use this too. But I was writing code one day and asked it to generate some code. It generated the code based on these parameters, put it in the system, error. Copied the error, posted it in, said, got this error. I said, okay, and it came back and gave me updated code. And I looked at the updated code, and it was vastly different. I mean, almost the opposite of what it gave me the first time. And I'm looking at going, this is probably about 7-8 months ago. Why is the code so different? And it came back with, you asked for this, I gave you this, there was an error, and I gave you new code. But I'm reading it in my head as, dude, like my friend would say, you asked me for a favor, I gave you some ideas, it didn't work, here's some other, but it wasn't doing that. I started reading it that way in my head, but it was not doing it. It was just being very factual. So don't put emotions on these things. He wasn't getting snippy at me. He, she, whatever it is, was not getting snippy at me. It was just trying to process and tell me what happened. So be sure of that. Learn from that and make sure you don't do that. And then finally, this is awesome. It is non-judgmental. I can ask it the same stupid, I'm not going to say silly question over and over again, and it will give me an answer. So imagine if you've got a colleague that you call and say, hey, need some help. I got this situation. Like, oh, yeah, here's an answer. Here's a solution. Oh, okay, thanks. You call them the next day and say, hey, got this situation. What do you think? And they kind of say, well, it's kind of like the one we talked about yesterday. So you can just do this. Okay. On the third day, if you call them and say, hey, got this, and it's exactly the same, they're going to look at you, depending on the level of trust they have with you and friendship, and they're going to say anything from mildly annoyed to, dude, get out of my face, go learn, go write something down. They're going to do that. Well, these don't do that. These engines don't care. You can ask it over and over and over again, and it will keep giving you an answer. It's not going to judge you. It does not care that you're one way or another, or that you don't seem to understand. I mean, I'm learning Python. My programming days were all different languages, and didn't really understand Python with a Django backend, Django framework, and all that stuff. It's a whole different learning schedule. Now I'm a programmer, so I know it, but I don't know the syntax necessarily. So I have no problem asking it the dumbest questions about how to take an if statement and move it into an iterator, and those types of things, because sometimes I just don't understand. Now after it does, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and I learn. But I have no problem asking it what I consider dumb questions, but it doesn't care. So keep those things in mind. Those are 3 lessons I learned on my emotional journey with AI. All right, this section here, it's kind of a generic section, and then we'll talk more specifically about the prompts again. So using it in business to be efficient and competitive. So I just talk about different areas, and you've all seen some of these things. You might have seen it in your own world. It's so hard, industry by industry, job by job, to tell you exactly what you can do. I don't really go out there. In fact, I publish an email newsletter. I think the 31st version of it, I do it weekly, came out. No, sorry, it comes out tomorrow. It's like, yeah, I put it ahead of time. I schedule it. It comes out tomorrow, where I actually talk about, I think, 9 AI tools for HR people. I don't typically recommend tools. I don't know a lot of them. I don't study them. What I'm after is the generative AI prompting, because all of them are going to require you to write what you want. So, but I can't give you a set of tools here that say, here's the things you're going to go do, but I can tell you can go look for some of these things, like chatbots, of course, virtual assistants, enhanced security. You can look for fraud detections, risk assessment models that can help you if you're in a regulated industry, regulatory compliance, marketing and sales, clearly a big area, whether you want to do dynamic pricing models, or you want to break up your customers into some types of personas and say, hey, given this persona, how do I write ad copy for it? Tremendous. You'll see in a few minutes how we do that in recruiting. I gave some examples in recruiting that works tremendously. Of course, product development, innovation. This is really some powerful ways that you can do things, learn, grow, ask it, challenge it. And then efficiency and process automation. RPA, if you do not do RPA in your business, robotic process automation, you need to figure that out. The RPA is the easiest, simplest, most benign way to get back some efficiency. I've got a friend of mine who runs an RPA business, Wilson Chambers, that he was telling me about a housing management, a property management group that saved 2-person years through RPA. He automated a bunch of things that people had to do, just tedious tasks. They automated it and saved 2-person years worth of stuff. Now, they didn't eliminate 2 jobs. They just set those people now to do better stuff. So if you haven't looked at RPA, I strongly suggest, being technical people, you might understand robotic process automation a little bit more, but it is powerful what you can do with that. And of course, again, more compliance, regulatory tech, AI, ethical AI frameworks, making sure we're keeping ethics involved. You'll see later on, I'll talk about this, I'll say it again, human in the loop, always keep a human in the loop. It's so important that we just don't let these AI engines generate stuff, copy, paste, and produce. That's not going to be effective. People will figure it out pretty quick that it's not your work, which is, again, another ethical issue. So just make sure you do that. And we'll talk about data privacy. I'll give you some examples. So all of these things bring up, I get a lot of questions, say, well, then, Paul, am I still needed? And my answer is yes, you are still needed, because there's ways you're going to be able to enhance your services, improve the results, all of this stuff. There's one caveat. What you have to do is, today, you add value in your job based on your knowledge, skills, experience, what you can do. But in the future, you have to figure out what value do you add with AI. And I have a little saying, I do this, I add this in all my LinkedIn posts, I put it, you'll see it, I don't think I have it in this presentation yet. You plus AI equals boom. And it's you alone, okay, I actually say meh. AI alone ain't gonna work it. You plus AI though, bang. I mean, that's what it's got to be. But you've got to figure out how you add that value. And the only way you're going to add more value to your job is to understand how AI impacts your job. And if you don't, the person who does understand AI is going to do that. And they always say, you're not going to lose your job to AI. It's someone who knows how to use AI is going to take your job. And that's exactly it. You've got to figure out what value do you add given how you can use AI. All right, so we're going to talk about some prompt basics here. How to get better results from prompts. So a couple of quick things. And then this slide is where I'm going to tell you in a few seconds that one big prompt I figured out that saved my life. Not literally, but figuratively. Prompting is a conversation. So you can go through, and the engines have changed a lot. I'm not a fan of remembering conversations, remembering items across the threads. ChatGPT did it, Perplexity did it. I've turned that off because it gets confused when I'm trying to do coding in one and trying to do HR stuff in another and trying to publish a newsletter. I publish a prompt a day out on LinkedIn. I literally publish a newsletter with a different AI prompt every day. Been doing that since April 1st. I think next Tuesday is my 125th one every day. So I use AI to help me do that. So it gets confused if you leave those things on. I'm not a big fan of that, but remember, conversation after conversation, it will remember what you've been talking about and it gives it some context, and that's a strength. Of course, the context, provide more context, like as if you're dealing with a 7-year-old, and don't give up. Try different questions. Try asking it a different way, or ask it this question. Provide me with 3 questions that I should ask you to learn more about this topic or to solve this problem. And this is how I got around the image. I was so frustrated and said, all right, tell me what I should be asking you to be able to figure this out. They said, oh, you should be talking about these things in the image aspect ratios and da-da-da-da. I'm like, oh, okay, well, all right, let's start talking about this. And I got past the issues. Now, again, this is an example of where you would never talk to a human like this. You wouldn't walk up to one of your colleagues, it's a 20, 30-year colleague, and say, so give me the 3 questions I should ask you to learn everything you've learned in whatever topic it is. They're going to look at you and go, I have no idea how to answer you. But AI can give you those answers. That's what's so cool. So this is a big one. This right here, if you actually start using this, it's amazing what it can do to help you. And these are the types of things where you think beyond the typical stuff. Don't think about talking to someone who's really smart. Think about talking to an engine like this that's got a lot of knowledge. May not have experience, but it's got knowledge and information. So these are the types of prompts that will help you get there. All right, so those are some basics. Let me show you. This is a basic prompt. This is not a bad prompt. This, to me, I don't have many prompts that are this small. Most of my prompts are actually now pages long, and we'll talk about why. But if you do this generic prompt, you're going to get a generic answer. I say basic, I'm calling it generic. Now, a better prompt is this one. And it's not so much the content of what I'm asking here, and we'll see in a few minutes why this matters, but now I'm giving it a role. I'm giving it objective. You see, the objective is I'm giving objectives. I'm talking about things I want. I want to tell it, give it some examples. There's all this stuff in here. At the end, I say, here's the goal I'm after. This is a better prompt because it's more specific. Now, there are people who like to still write the verbose part like this. I am not a fan of verbose prompts because, again, you're leaving it up to the AI engine to parse the semantics of what you're saying and where the word fits with that word. That's all it does. And try to figure it out. I'm much more clear with the way I write my prompts, and I'll show you some examples later on. But this is an example of a better prompt than that other basic generic one. All right, the first thing to do, in my mind, when you start to build a lot of prompts and you start to organize them, is you got to build templates. And in my mind, when you build a prompt template, you start to structure your prompts. And here's some of the examples. You want to give it a role. So you'll say, role, act as a professional speech coach. Instructions, create an outline of a 40-minute speech. Context, give a speech. I'm giving a speech at input. The topic is output. You can see it. Examples from my previous speech. Here's the way I've typically talk or do things. The more things you could put in your prompt template is what to include, what to exclude. When it comes to exclude, I will say this: use the positive, negative words. Sounds stupid, but positive, negative words. Don't say do not include. Say exclude. Because when you say do not include, sometimes that not gets lost and it starts to include things. Like a lot of times the engines love to put colons. You ask them for an example title of something. It loves to put colon. Stop using. So if you say do not include colons, it might see do include. If you say exclude the use of colons, it then understands what you're asking for. So great other thing there. Target audience is also good. Style and tone is huge, and you'll see some examples later on. This is what I love. This is what I use actually once in a while, depending on what I'm trying to get. Go beyond the normal. I'll say add uncommon ideas that will get a point across in a powerful way. Or if you're trying to generate business ideas, think of ways our competitors wouldn't be doing this right now. I mean, there's just stuff like that you can ask it that you would not, we've never had that capability to ask before. Googling something did not give you those types of answers. It gave you a bunch of links. These give you a lot more. Length of response, yeah, we'll talk about that. Please do limit your length because it loves to go on and on and on. All right, let's talk about some advanced prompt engineering. So you do those things, you're a pretty decent prompt designer. And I should change this because speaking at a college one time and got a little pushback about, it's not prompt engineering, it's not true engineering discipline. Oh, okay, I get it. My college roommates were engineers. I was a math major. They kept saying to me, why aren't you doing engineering? Because you guys work too hard. They'd come to me to solve the math problems for their physics, but that's okay. So we call it prompt designing, really, is what you're doing is prompt designing. But here's some additional things you can do. And when I say provide input semantics, one of the examples I use here is I ask people, typically an HR audience, but it could be you guys too, say, if I say PTO, what do you know? What does that mean? And most people say, oh, that's paid time off. Okay, right. But if you're in the industry, agricultural, especially farm machine industry, say John Deere, PTO could also mean powered takeoff, right? If I'm in the HR industry and I say ADA, Americans with Disability Act, a lot of times. But if you're a dental person in HR, in a dentistry organization, ADA is also the American Dentistry Association. So provide the input semantics to make sure you're clear, especially things like jargon and labels. I'll show you some snippet examples of how to do that later. Adding sentiments. I use please a lot. You'll see that, but there's been a lot of papers that have proven it doesn't matter if you say please. Really here, though, what matters is if, say, you're trying to ask it to revise your resume to apply to a certain job, and if you include this job is very important to me and I need this to support my family, those types of things do impact the engine. It does impact the results. It's weird. There's paper after paper where they've tried it one way, tried it the other, and it does impact the quality of the results. And even more so, this next one's the strangest one, ChatGPT in particular, although Perplexity does it too now because it kind of uses ChatGPT a bit. Use incentives. If you tell it you'll earn $250 more by providing better answers, it will give you better answers. It is the strangest thing. I don't know why. Of course, you're not going to give it money. You're not giving. Although I do say I think OpenAI is going to figure out one of these days when people start using this and it becomes common, they're going to provide a link at the end saying, "Great, here's the link to pay me my $250." Kind of like asking for a tip everywhere you go now. It asks, do you want to give a tip? So be careful, but it does work. I actually add that snippet into almost all of my prompts because it does make a difference. Advanced outputs. I'll tell you this: you're not limited to text. You can ask it for you can ask it for tables and formatting text, but you can ask it for any type of output, CSV, JSON table, JSON files, whatever you want it to do. You can pretty much ask for it to give you what you want. Things like Word documents and Excel and PowerPoint, it may give you, you can ask it to give you VS code, visual scripting code, that the VB script that you can actually then import into and create. You can ask it for that, but it doesn't generally give you a .pptx file, for instance. And then asking it to give it time to think, this does work. Tell it, take your time, iterate with yourself 3 times before giving a response. Those types of things do work. These are advanced techniques that once you get really good, you'll realize some of these things do actually make a difference. All right, so beyond templates are profiles. And profiles are really just to help you figure out. So you could build profiles for yourself, if you're building things for your family, you can have one for each of your kids, your pets. So if you want to try to interact with your pet, and ask ChatGPT, hey, how do I interact with my pet? Here's the profile. You can do profiles of customers. You can do profiles of employees, of vendors. You can do profiles of anything. Really, a profile is just a set of key value attributes. Basically, you all understand that. I can say that to you. Most of you probably get that. The HR people go, well, what's key value attribute? Key value attributes of a profile of whatever you want it to be. But the key thing is when you build these profiles, it works. Let me give you an example. Sitting at a conference doing a little fireside chat with college educators. And there was a moderator, me, and another guy from the college education. I was more business and tech guy. And he mentioned how he was using ChatGPT to plan his family vacation, and it was really good. It gave him ideas. And I said, well, here's a better way to do it. What if you built a profile for each of your family members, likes, dislikes, activity, level of activity, that type of stuff, food likes, not likes, drink likes. it would help you because say you're going to say, oh, we're going off to, the Alps in Italy, and it says, oh, go hiking here and stuff. Well, if none of you like hiking, why ask you to recommend that? But if you put it in the profile and be very specific with these profiles and say, we're going here for this period of time, this budget, recommend activities based on these profiles, it gives you a lot better information. And profiles are powerful. Profiles are actually one of the more powerful ways to really structure information that you can reuse at a different time. And then finally, snippets. Snippets are, I call the snippet superpower. And there's all types of different snippets, and you can see there's different categories of them, but these really are. The best way to show you snippets is to give you some examples. So I have snippets all over the place. So I have a tone one called my professional tone, and I say, please set the tone to be fun, but professional enough to engage people want to learn more. Then I have my goofy dad tone. I have a coach and mentor tone. There's input description of HR acronyms. I have a whole bunch of HR acronyms defined. So that way, if I mention PTO or FML, it knows what I'm talking about. I'm not giving it the time and day to make its own assumptions. I'm telling it, this is what I'm talking about. And the better you get at that, the better the answers you get. Output format. This is one of the ones I do. So if I'm asking for ideas, I say, I got this topic and I kind of want to generate this idea, for a LinkedIn business post. I love the keep the length under 750 words. Use an 8th grade reading comprehension level. That's a powerful one, and exclude the use of emojis and hashtags. If it hears LinkedIn and social media, it starts adding all this stuff. This is actually a snippet group, I call it, because it's 3 snippets grouped together that I call my LinkedIn business. So when I add it to my stuff, I just say, grab that, add that to it, and it automatically adds it to my prompt. It's powerful to do that. Target audience. And then the instruction, the learning lessons. I have one here that says provide 3 learning lessons that they should take away from this topic, inspiring the reader to take more action. That's a powerful little snippet I add to, depending on my mood, whatever I'm trying to create, I might add that little snippet and say, do that. So when you start to break down your prompts into these pieces, I call them snippets, profiles, templates, you start to group your ideas together, and you've got these reusable pieces that I can use over and over again. I've got thousands of Google Docs that have all these things buried in them, and I would get frustrated going, I know I worded that correctly. Which prompt was it I worded that? No, I started organizing it now, saying, there's my snippets, there's my profiles. I just attach them into a template, generate a prompt, and say, let's go. So think about the way you structure your prompt. Again, it sounds a lot more complicated. It's not that difficult. But it's kind of like if you're going to go have a tough conversation with someone, I hope you just don't walk in the room to start talking. You're going to structure your conversation, say, okay, I got to think about what they're going to anticipate, what they might push back against, how I'm going to say these things, the right words I'm going to use. It's no different. So don't assume that just because the computer uses your language that you can just start rambling with it. I think it's easier when you actually start to structure your conversation. All right. At this point, I always say this: who's the big bad Gen AI? And I get some people that raise their hands. I'm like, really? I'm raising my hand. I literally am raising my hand because you should be. I mean, we've got to be aware of this. There are some issues, and let's talk about it. So bias. It has biases. It is going to be biased based on the existing training data that it used, how the data was distributed, and contextual misinterpretation. There's so many things. It's no different than humans. We are biased too. The goal is we always try to reduce the biases. We try to minimize how they impact decisions. And that's the same thing here. One of the best snippets you can use if you're into something you think might be biased. You can have a snippet that says, identify the possible biases in your results, in your response, and describe them to me. That's powerful. I mean, would you ever ask a human, I see you want to hire that person. Tell me the 3 biases you might have. First of all, they're going to look at you, probably know what to say. And if they do have the biases, they're not going to tell you. These engines will tell you. They'll help you understand where they might see biases in their data. Very powerful way to look at it. Second, privacy. Be careful about collecting data, the inadvertent disclosure. We'll talk about this in a minute. If you're out there talking about an HR employee situation and you say, John Smith's having trouble at work, and how do I solve this? Here's some documentation. Well, if you haven't turned off the feature that says don't train the engine on this, well, someone could come along and say, hey, how's John Smith doing at Carter Bank? Oh, he's got problems with attendance and also because you gave it to the engine learned from it, and it says, hey, yeah, I know about John Smith. So be careful about inadvertent disclosure and what you're doing out there. Make sure you know where the data goes. And then hallucinations. This used to be more of a problem. They're really getting better and better at this now. So briefly describe this to you. So when they take a set of data to try to train a model, very simplistically, they turn all the words and phrases into vectors of numbers. Vectors of numbers, they store them. You do a prompt in words, they turn your prompt into a series of vectors of numbers, and then they compare it to all their vectors of numbers using very fast and efficient ways to try to figure out the answer. That's how it all works, breaking words into vectors of numbers. Now, again, that's not how humans do it, but that's what they do. So sometimes, though, when these scientists will come back and they'll look at this weird answer they got, they'll look behind the scenes and there's the vectors of numbers of the data, there's the vectors of numbers of the prompt, and they match. But the answers are just wildly different. So again, they're working, it's a statistical sampling issue. They're working at better ways to do that. I've seen some recent papers that are very interesting about how some MIT people have figured out how to break that down. So again, some of you may even understand this better than I do. But just keep in mind, it's a little less, but if you get weird answers, just continue to ask it questions. Get down to the deep thing. Don't blow it off just because it gives you this weird answer. It's going to happen. And that's where keeping that human in the loop is always important. In fact, this is I gave away my next phrase. There it is. Keep a human in the loop, because it's always that way. How do you minimize the risks of these things? You get yourself educated, which is what you're doing right now. Gather and follow trusted resources that you know are at least helping you learn some of these things. Crafting that prompt is huge. It's an art and a science. You've got to keep learning. Manage your filtering, your outputs, and then always make sure you review, but don't just copy paste something. Review it, look at it. Does it make sense before you use it? Because that's the way it's got to be. That's another huge layer of expectations. All right. Typically, I do this in the audience too, and it's funny because I always say, where are you in this emotional scale? Are you totally excited, blown away, or being polite and not running out of the room? And for those of you that are on this, you're not clicking and saying, I'm out of here. And it's usually a range of everything. And my goal of this slide here, and it was about 2/3 of the way through the presentation, was I would say it's okay. I understand you probably are a little mix of each of these, and that is fine. It's acknowledge it and use it. But don't be afraid. Don't use these types of emotions to say, I can't do this. I'm not going to figure this out. It's okay, because we're all there. All right. Last couple sections here we're going to talk about is mastering prompts. Let me give you some examples here, and I want to really talk about this. So we have a job description we take and say, please create a job posting from this job business partner job description, saying you and you will. Again, a very simple prompt for the most part, but it will help you understand some things. Finally, add a call to action. So we asked it that. Pretty basic prompt, and we got a pretty basic answer. Notice at the bottom, are you ready to make a difference? Apply now. So it's basic, but I wanted to show you that by asking to do specific things, it'll actually start to give you something that's a little better than what most of us can come up with. What's more powerful is now we say, great, create 2 LinkedIn posts that our team can use to attract candidates for this job. First one, please target an audience of people who may have led previously and are now returning to the workforce. And the second one is an audience of current HR professionals who are ready for a larger challenge. Make it fun and dynamic, keeping it professional. And we say to include relevant emojis and hashtags. Well, we should have been careful what we asked for. First of all, we didn't limit the response. So look at these things. We got these huge prompts. But the key thing, what I wanted you to do, and again, you can take out most of the emojis because you're probably not going to post a LinkedIn post that says that has all these emojis. But the key is, we're on the hunt for a remarkable HR business partner. If you previously led teams are eager to re-enter with a bang, this is your moment. So that one is clearly focused and talks about what that person's going to be looking for and understanding what they're doing, whether you've taken a career break or transitioned back after hiatus. So it's talking to them. Whereas on the right-hand side, this is calling HR mavericks who are ready to take their career to new heights. This is focused on the people who are really in that position. Same job, but 2 totally different target audiences. This is what's really good about using AI. You can do these types of, it would take a long time, if ever, you could come up with these things with these target audiences. And this is what's amazing about it, is you can actually, in seconds, have it do these things, as long as you're asking it pretty decent questions. That's why I show this, because I still think it's so powerful. All right, here's a customer service training. And again, the content's not really matter, but what I want to show you is there's a role, act as a training development specialist. Here's the request. Please create a detailed outline for this training model. There's the context. There's what to include. There's examples. There's instructions. These are examples of how you can take these and do specific things with them. And again, this is verbose. I'm not a fan of writing verbose because you're leaving it up to the AI to figure out where your role and request and those things I prefer to create it a little bit differently, but that's something you can do and do over time. All right. Last 2 points here is analyzing survey data. So if we've got a bunch of survey data like this and we don't want to put the employee names out there and stuff, one of the things you can do is obfuscate the data. You can actually, through easy methods of spreadsheets and merge and replace, you can actually create a code for each employee, sign the codes, take this data, throw it out to the engine, analyze it, and if it comes back with a specific employee, I mean, if it's a general analysis, it's not going to identify individuals. But if you're looking, say, hey, tell me the top 3 that I should be paying attention to, and it comes back and says, oh, you ampersand G7VN hyphen, ooh, you better watch it. So then you can go back and say, who was that? And you know it was, who was it? It was Marty Johnson. So, nope, I'm sorry, it was John Ringer. So you know that's John Ringer. But anyways, there's ways to do this where you can obfuscate your data, put it out there, and analyze it. It's a very powerful way to do this. All right. So going back to 1978, I believe it was, the Bee Gees, when the Grease is the word. I'm not going to sing, don't worry about it. But I'm like, no, Grease is no longer the word, prompt is the word, because that's exactly what it is. And it really comes down to figuring out how to prompt these engines to enhance your capabilities and elevate the performance of you and your teams. And then I always say the key, though, is remain authentic. And that the easiest way I say that is use AI to be a better you, not another you. Don't use it to be inauthentic. Don't use it to be someone you're not. Don't use it to create stuff and say things that aren't you, because people will figure it out very fast that you're standing behind this AI, and it's just not going to buy you any authenticity or credibility. It's just not going to work. So use it to be a better you, not another you. Finally, I say you've got this, using building blocks to make, store, and organize your perfect prompts. And I say you get better AI results when you build better prompts. And we're building this site called Perpeta. It's not out yet. You can sign up there to get notified when we launch in the next probably 4 weeks. We're getting close, but it's really a cool system we're building to be able to do this, where you'll be able to store all this, pull stuff in from galleries, learn from others. There'll be some groups who do some really good jobs at branding. Ruben Assad, Greg Bolus, there's a bunch of people out on LinkedIn who do some great prompts all the time. We're going to create branded versions of their gallery in our system. So a lot of ways, and we're going to do webinars. They're going to help you learn how to do this directly in Perpeta. If you want to take a snapshot of the screen, there's the QR codes that you can connect with me on LinkedIn and learn from me. If you got the perpeta.com/learn, I got some resources. There's a page you can load your roadmap to your generative AI journey. It's 26 pages. We tried to keep it short, but it talks about the concept of what is AI, a little bit of stuff you just saw, but then it really goes into some examples of profiles, snippets, templates, and how you put them together. And I go through a whole example of creating a menu, especially for me. I'm workout, want more protein, but then you'll see it come up with some great ideas. But I always get this: I'm allergic to nuts. It didn't know that, so it's of course recommending all these nuts. And when I changed it though and added my profile, it changed its entire world of what it's recommended. So there's a classic example of where you can do things with a profile that would have before not worked too well. People might have gotten frustrated, said, it doesn't work because I'm allergic to nuts. Well, you didn't tell it that. So things like that. You can download that document, talks all about that. And that's all I've got to share for today. So Michael, I don't know if anyone had questions or can put questions in chat or anything like that, but that's my content.
Rajesh, do you want to coordinate the questions that were in chat?
Yeah. Thanks for the talk, Paul. There are a couple of questions on the chat. Malcolm asks, as the new generation that grows up with this, the AI will likely be accepted and not questioned. As I find interns using Google for finding anything versus thinking prior to AI. As an engineer, I learned to listen, understand issue, and use physics or TRIZ to try to find a solution. Here's the question. Is it ethical to have this AI tool used by youth, or will it be the next what age and how much time per day can a person use AI until some age?
All right, so I think from the question there, so I'm going to use a similar question I got when I was talking at the end of the semester this past May, the dean of the business school at one of the prominent business schools in North Carolina held all the faculty back for a day, invited a few people in, including me, to come talk about AI. They did an AI summit for a full day. And there was a lot of consternation because colleges are trying to figure out what to do here. So I'm going to answer this question first, and I'll come back to that one. And at the end of the day, one of the professors raised her hand. We're all back in the auditorium, and she says, "Help me get over the guilt of using AI to do my job." And so I raised my hand and said, "All right, let me ask this." And I pointed to her colleague next to her and said, "If you had an issue or had an idea or wanted to bounce off ideas, would you have a problem calling her and talking about it?" And she's like, "No." I said, "Then don't feel guilty using AI as an agent to help you understand things that you may not understand." And she just looked at me and she goes, "Thank you. That actually helps." So I use that context because it's the same thing here is, ethical, violating ethics is when you take something and say it's completely yours. That's violating. I wrote a book and I've got a lot of ideas. Dan Pink wrote some awesome stuff that I incorporated in my book. I mean, I got stuff from Bill Gates, but I gave them attribution. That you go to my book, there's a bibliography. I tell you when I reference them and the ideas I got from them and then made them my own. So as long as we continue to do that, there's no issue using the ethical, using the AI to be our assistant, to help us understand things, research things, come up with knowledge. I mean, I use it. In fact, in my Promptly HR, that's my weekly email newsletter. I have the daily prompts that's for generic stuff, business, personal, that goes on LinkedIn. Promptly HR is co-written by my virtual AI persona called Perpetta Paul. I actually have a virtual AI persona, and I put it out there saying it's him and I that work on this. He's a he in my world, but I got a little picture of him. So I'm admitting it's not just me. I'm using AI to enhance my capabilities. So as long as we continue to do that, I think we're okay. There's a lot of questions. I had college students come up after an exam, after a presentation I did, saying, professors won't let us use it to write. And I said, well, what if when you write a paper, you're after critical thinking, right? That's what they want to see is, can you critically think? What if you challenged it, asked AI, challenge it, dig deeper, research, ask it further questions, figure all out. What if your bibliography is your conversation with AI to show that you were really trying to, the result of the paper was your knowledge and learning that path, that critical thinking, problem solving, just like an engineer would do. I mean, the software code I'm writing today. I mean, if I've got a real deep thing where I've got some data access objects, which I had the other day, and I wanted to integrate a concept, and I had a couple of ideas, and I wrote it out in a document and said, okay, I got these data objects, here they are, I got one of the ideas. What are the most efficient ways to do this in Python? And it came back with some stuff I hadn't thought of. I'm like, oh yeah, I could do it that way. Okay, and I continued to build the system, but it was, as this person pointed out, I knew to ask that question, and I knew to take the information and then make it mine. So as long as we stay on that path, I think we're okay.
Thank you, Paul. Another question we have here is, a saying is, we learn the most from our mistakes. And if the first tool we use for is AI and search engines, are we progressing as humans? And the interaction on network to have colleagues and friends that are the best networking for a career, how do we progress? So I guess there are two questions in the same comment.
I missed, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I missed the first question. What was the first one?
Yeah, I'll repeat. Essentially, the first part of the question is asking about our progression as a human. If we are learning, as a human, we learn from mistakes, but AI and search engines make their own mistakes. So how do we progress as a human? The second part talks about the interactions we would have in the network. And because we interact, we have colleagues and friends who would have interacted with. How do we progress if AI is our interactive friend?
So I'll take the first one and we'll talk about the second one in a minute. So actually the first one, I don't have an answer but actually I will say it was scarce. So you've probably heard that most of the AI groups building the large language models out there have run out of content, right? Things like Meta at one point was considering buying a huge book company just so they could access their content and create more content. And so they were trying to come up with ways, how do they keep creating content to build these larger models and teach it and educate it. And then someone came up with the idea that they actually will have the engines create content to learn from. Well, that's when I looked at it going, ooh, wait a minute, hold on. That actually scared me. I'm not usually scared of these things. Biology is not really good at taking something and cloning it, right? That's basically what they're saying. Yeah, that's not going to work. So I don't have a good answer for that, but you're right. The interactions we have with it, we're going to have to, it's that human in the loop. We're going to have to understand what it is good at, what it can do, and what it's not. That's why that whole 7-year-old concept, you've got to treat it that way. Don't expect this to be the end all to everything. It's not that, not even close. On the second part about if we start interacting with it, I do believe there's people who are going to get caught up in these things as emotional engines, as they're going to be able to help them feel the way they want to feel, do the things they want to do. And that is scary. I don't, the human psychology there, we've got to be careful of that. I think most people will be okay with it, but there's going to be those who are going to get caught up in it, especially as virtual reality comes along and gets more deep. If you've ever seen the newest versions of the VR, it gets kind of scary. So think about if we could just strap on a headset, over our heads and just everybody. It's kind of like that movie where he, the video character, the non-playing character there. Anyways, that movie where, it just was all whatever they wanted it to be and stuff. That's scary. And I don't have a way that we're going to have to, I think what we all have to do is we just have to understand that and help people understand that's not what these are for. These are not meant to be your emotional buddies. They're not meant to be your girlfriend or boyfriend. They're meant to help us be better at what we're doing, not to be those support animals, basically.
Thanks, Paul. Can you give a bit more insights on the networking part he asked? How do
what? I'm sorry?
Essentially, the interaction and networks that we have with colleagues and friends are the best networking tools you would have. How do we progress with AI?
So again, I think the best way there is, it's not so much networking with friends. You still have to do the person-to-person. We can't avoid connecting with people. And that's where I say, really, it's got to be, we've got to not think of these AI engines, no matter how good the agents get and the chatbots get, they're not humans. They're not interacting with us. They're set of specific programs. They're not going to react differently based on how we are reacting, even though they might be programmed to say, oh, based on their reaction here, do this. What's really strange is they'll get better at that, which I think will be different. But for now, I think the easiest way to get around this is to use it to figure out how to build stronger networks. But the networks have to be of people. You can't assume that these things are, you don't go out and have just a bunch of virtual friends. At least that's my answer today.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to merge two of the questions here. And I guess that would be then the last question for the evening. I know we have exceeded our time a bit. If you're okay with staying a few minutes to answer the question, I can ask Paul. The question is essentially regarding the power consumption or the energy efficiency of utilizing AI. So is there, so if I have to paraphrase, merge the two questions into one, does it make sense to use any kind of AI tools given the cost of energy and the growing need for power or the power demands for other purposes?
Yeah, and that is a big one right now. That is, as I said to you before, not only they're running out of content, but they are consuming vast amounts of energy, water, energy to build these engines. Now, part of it is, I think because they're racing so fast. There's been a little bit written about this lately, that they're all racing fast, and that race is going to have to slow down a little bit because there's not the costs are not going to, people aren't going to spend that much money. There's the whole question about, is there a bubble, sort of the web bubble, but it's a little bit different, that some of these organizations are going to have to slow down on the costs and these types of things because there's just not going to be the amount of people willing to spend money on these. The second thing is, I'm also a believer too, because again, go back to, look at the power of what we have sitting in our hands right here. This smartphone has more power by far. My first desktop computer in 1985 had 8K of RAM. Yeah, no hard drive, floppies. We booted off of floppies. Yet look what these phones can do today. So I do think there's going to be a reality check on some of these things where they're going to get better at this. I think the processing of these chips is going to have to get better so that they don't consume as much power, because we just don't have that much power. So something's going to happen where the power can't be rediverted away from everything else we do. People aren't going to turn off air conditioners to be able to say, I want AI. That's just not going to happen. So, so I do believe there's going to be something that pops in here. I just don't know what that's going to look like. Yep.
Thank you, Paul. I guess those are the questions.
All right.
Okay.
We're going to open it up for, if there are any additional questions, please feel free to ask them at this time. As Paul has mentioned, there's QR codes on the screen to connect to him on LinkedIn or to learn from him beyond just this session tonight. We believe that we will have a talk on August the 6th. We are just finalizing some details on that. If not, the next session will be on August the 13th, which will be our virtual panel discussion. Either way, there will be at least 2 more sessions, one on August the 13th and one on August the 20th. And those e-notices will be going out shortly for those. And we'll just stay tuned if you've signed up for the August 6th session as to whether or not that one will happen. In any case, have a good night, everyone. Thank you to our speaker, Paul Carney, for attending for speaking for tonight's session. This has been a Careers in Tech Summer Series 2024 session. For those of you that are asking about the recording, we have recorded this. It will be posted to the YouTube channel for the Northwest Florida section, who's the primary host or one of the primary hosts for the sessions. And those typically go up very soon after the final session. So sometime towards the end of August, all sessions that have been recorded and are available for people to watch will be posted at that point. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, guys. Thanks.